taking a second look at Epicurus's letter to Monoicus. It's a very dense little paragraph, and not easy to unpack. To read it through, you have to think about it. It's not put in the most straightforward way, I think, in terms of the way that the thoughts are arranged. But if you read it closely, think about it, think about the logical structure of it, I think that something pretty clear does emerge. He begins by saying, accustom yourself to believe that death is nothing to us. For, ... we don't have to go any farther. I mean, what we start out with here is a claim, really an order, an imperative. Accustom yourself to believe that death is nothing to us. And then followed by the word for. And what that indicates right there is the logical status, I think, of that first assertion. The for indicates that what comes next will be a reason for believing what he starts with, right? I mean, just think about it. I think you should look both ways before you cross the street. For many have been hit by cars because they didn't, or something like that. That is, the for is what they call an indicator, I suppose, in common language of a logical relationship, that what comes next will support what has just been said, and that certainly is true here. So, which is to say, I think as you're reading that first assertion, accustom yourself to believe that death is nothing to us, is a pretty good candidate for the conclusion of the thing. Accustom yourself to believe that death is nothing to us, for good and evil imply awareness. Just, not put in the most explicit way, but if something is to be good for you or evil for you, at the very least, you should be aware of it, or you must be aware of it. That is, if I say that X is good or X is bad, that implies necessarily that I am aware of X. And death is a privation of all awareness. So, rather complicated thought, but you can see what he's saying there, that if death is a privation of all awareness, I suppose the unstated implication there is that I am not aware of death. And so death itself can be neither good nor evil for me because I'm not aware of it. And being aware of something is a necessary condition for it being good or evil for you. Therefore, a right understanding that death is nothing to us. And again, he's sort of going back to the first thing, right? Okay, I'm trying to establish that death is nothing to us, I suppose. Makes the mortality of life enjoyable, not by adding to life an unlimited time, but by taking away the yearning after immortality. So here we get into maybe some ambiguities in terms of what exactly it is that he's trying to prove. Is he trying to prove that if we believe that death is nothing to us, our lives will be happier? Or is he trying to establish that death is nothing to us? Obviously, they're very closely related, but they are distinct. And I think as more and more as you think about this little passage from Epicurus, that distinction becomes more and more clear. That is, what is he trying to prove? Is he trying to prove that we'll be happier if we believe something? Or is he trying to prove that the thing is true? Is he trying to prove that we would be happier if we believe that death is nothing to us? Or is he trying to prove that death is actually nothing to us? I think it's actually the latter. And that is that he's trying to prove that death is, in fact, nothing to us. But that, one of the side effects of coming to this realization is that we'll be happier. For life has no terror for those who thoroughly apprehend that there are no terrors for them in ceasing to live. That is, ceasing to live is not a bad thing. So there's no reason to fear death. Foolish, therefore, is the person who says that he fears death, not because it will pain when it comes, because it pains in the prospect. It's a little bit ambiguous, that statement there. Maybe it's a little clearer in the original Greek. But we generally get a sense that, the only way that death can really hurt us is by giving us unfounded fears about it while we are alive, and that we can dispel them if we clarify for ourselves what death is. Whatever causes no annoyance when it is present causes only a groundless pain in the expectation. That really clarifies things, doesn't it? That is, that Death causes no annoyance, no suffering, no bad consequences when it is present. So any expectation of it with anxiety or fear would be groundless. Death, therefore, the most awful of evils, and I think that has to be read as being ironic, because he's trying to establish clearly that it's not an evil, is nothing to us, seeing that when we are, death has not come, and when death has come, we are not, which is very powerful, I think, articulation of his idea about death is that nowhere do we actually meet death. When we are alive, that logically implies that death has not come. So we don't meet it in life. And when death has come, we are not. So we don't have the ability to experience it when it comes, because it is the end of all experience. So that's a pretty powerful but challenging statement there, that when we are, death has not come, and when death has come, we are not. But it does, I think, make sense, and is a pretty strong reason in support of his position. It is nothing then, either to the living or to the dead. With the living, it is not. That is, death has not come, so it's not here. And the dead exist no longer, so that they don't have the capacity, once they have died, to be aware of death. It's a difficult argument, and as I said, I think the two candidates for what the actual overall conclusion for what the overall conclusion is either that he's trying to prove that we'll be happier if we believe that death is nothing to us, or he's trying to prove that indeed death is nothing to us. I think that they are both things that he's trying to get across, but I think you sort of have to make that distinction. And I think that clearly he does believe that death is nothing to us, that it's not just that it's a good belief to have in terms of pragmatically increasing our happiness because we believe it to be true, that it indeed is true. And the reasoning that he gives is largely in support of that idea that, in fact, death is nothing to us, meaning it's neither good nor bad. Because it's not something that we'll ever be aware of, that we'll ever experience. And, so if we take that to be the conclusion, death is nothing to us, well, because death is the end of all awareness, in order for us in order for something to be something to us, especially to be good or bad for us, good or evil, then we must be aware of it. But we've just claimed that death is the end of all awareness, so it has no value for us, neither good nor bad. Though it might be a way of constructing the argument. I think that this is a real case of what I was getting at last week in the video about assumptions and conclusions, that it's a good exercise, especially with a philosopher, especially with a philosophical text, to really ask yourself, what is the starting point of this argument? What is the starting point for this particular author? And what I mean is, where do they start in terms of formulating their position? And one of the things I wanted to emphasize in that video was that the starting point can't be something that you argue for. The starting point is truly the starting point, insofar as it's where the argument starts. So if it starts, it can't actually provide a foundation for itself, because then that would be the starting point. So you're looking for what sort of the author just believes to be true and where they start. And I think that not clearly, but I think if we look at this, the real starting point for Epicurus is here. That is, if you think about what actually provides the foundation for his position on death, and you ask yourself, well, where does he start in what does he say that he doesn't try to back up, right? Because it's an assumption. It's a real starting point, is that death is the privation of all awareness, which is an interesting place to start. That is, he doesn't try to argue for that. He just sort of relies dialectically on you saying, well, yeah, that's what death is. Death is the taking away, the deprivation, the privation of all consciousness, of all awareness. And if we start with that notion of that's what death is, then everything else seems to follow pretty naturally from it. So I would say that if we're looking on the other side, we were looking at conclusions. What is the overall conclusion? On the other side of the argument, if we say, well, what is the starting point? I would say that that's probably it. And again, once that is just accepted, then everything else seems to fall into place.